You're listening to episode 746 of a Very Spatial podcast, September 15th, 2024.
Hello and welcome to our Very Spatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb. And this is Frank.
And this week we're going to be talking to Dan Coe and Nat Case of the Atlas of Design series. And yeah, that'll be a good talk in just a little bit. But of course, you know, there's other things. Last week we talked about, don't forget about Earth Science Week. If you are planning to do GIS Day things, we were already invited just this past week after we did the last interview to our counties or cities GIS Day. Apparently Sue didn't get that email, so I'll forward that to you. So keep in mind that, you know, it's now time to have those things planned because we're only, 2 months out from GIS Day and Geography Awareness Week?
A little less, actually, I think. Well, certainly by the time most people listen to this, it'll be slightly less.
Or well after. So that's a thing to keep in mind that it's coming up. And I don't know, any other housekeeping?
The new conference season has begun both for the fall abstracts and getting stuff in for spring and summer conferences, and also a round of conferences this fall. So check schedules. So I'm saying that at the beginning, even though that we used to do just events at the end, but just overall, it's that time of year.
CDAG is in your state this year, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the geography field for AAG, the regional meetings tend to be in the fall, but also abstracts and things are due for various conferences coming up next year.
So can I just tell my pet peeve?
Sure.
With CDAG specifically, it seems to be rampant with CDAG, and it may be just because I'm in that region, so I see that news more than any others, but all of the regional ones tend to say things like it's in Greenville, South Carolina, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what school's there, but that's essentially hosting it. But all like the flyer and stuff like that, come to Greenville and, you know, enjoy the thing and see the conference and check out this school and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, you know, for a bunch of geographers, we have this desire on those things to not put the state down. It's not anywhere on the flyer. Like,
There's a Greenville, North Carolina that's actually...
Greenville in most states.
Yeah, there's Greenville in most states, but the Greenville, North Carolina also hosts a university.
I know you know all that, really, where this institution's located at in the state and all that. But like, well, the rest of it don't always know that. So it's like, it's Greenville, North Carolina, Greenville, Alabama. I mean, you know.
I think perhaps maybe it's a bad habit we pick up from the referencing formats that we use for a lot of the geography journals, where for books, you just put the publication city, not state. And you're just like, okay.
Which is a fairly recent thing. You did used to do that.
No, other formats you do it in.
Yeah.
In the modified Chicago version that we tend to use.
Yeah, but I'm saying I don't think it was modified all that long ago.
It's been that way since at least for 20 some years.
See, I don't remember being that.
I can remember. I mean,
you didn't used to use
science,
that.
I grew up with MLA format, and you would have to put New York, or Toronto, Canada, or stuff like that. But it was a bit of a shock to me when moving to geography. It was like in New York, and I'm like, well, I mean, good thing it's or London. And I'm like, well, good thing most people know where that is. You know,
there's publishing companies in London, Ontario. I mean, come on.
There is more in UK.
There are, but
so there didn't, because there used to be a way that you could it was optional. If you didn't think people would know, you were supposed to put a describer.
That is probably true. But again, in the format that we use.
I know. Well, that's not right.
But again, you came from history. So
I did come from history, so maybe I'm remembering history, but that was it, right? If in fact, in London, Connecticut, I think actually there were books that were published there, but you were required, if it was not the one that people would assume, like New York, or London, UK, or I don't know if there's Chicago somewhere else or something, you were supposed to put something else after it to explain that.
Well, the silly part, though, right, is it all that important, really? I mean, whenever...
Hey, it's a geography podcast. This is important.
Well, like, you know, in the day where you literally got a piece of paper or you went and got microfiche or whatever, and you would say, oh, I need to find where the publishing company is because I need to copy this article and I need to write to them. All that stuff like that. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense, but you just Google it. I mean, you can Google the title and it'll go, here's the article, and give us $29.99. You can have it for a day.
Yeah, I mean, what's the purpose of even having the whole reference now? Just toss the DOI in there and you're good to go.
You know, actually, I'm not against it. As somebody who absolutely hates the tediousness of citation at the end, like getting all that format. It seems to take a really long time. So I'd be all cool with I like it when I can go to Google Scholar and it's just there. And I can just go copy paste that.
Yes, but the problem is when it's wrong from Google Scholar.
Yes, or
other source.
Or when you can't get your DOI to get generated, if you're like an editor in a journal like me, and for whatever reason, it's like, nope, not doing it. Not going to do it no matter how many times you ask me.
But the original point, of course, being that if you are a regional AAG in the United States, or I'm assuming this is less of an issue outside of the United States, anyone in the United States during a conference, stick the darn state name in there. It's not going to kill you. It's not, it helps. It helps for those of us who don't actually know all the places in the country.
For those of you who are still with us after the rant, the interview will be coming soon. First and only up in the news, the new Galileo satellites, numbers 29 and 30, have been declared operational, launched recently, declared operational. It means that 2 of the 3 segments are now completely filled, and there are new satellites launching in just a few weeks. So we're getting close to that Galileo being fully implemented in terms of having the minimum number of satellites needed for the constellation. I mean, it works. You can get a Galileo receiver and use it, but it does not have the full constellation up there by any means.
It's been a long road, though, so
yeah.
that will be exciting.
Had to move countries, had to, all kinds of things.
Yeah, see, that's what I thought when I was reading that. It said how close they were to done. I'm like, oh, this is super exciting. It's, near the finish line.
Almost there.
As they say, yeah.
Also, I can't. Every time we talk the Galileo Satellites, I can't help but think of the Indigo Girls. They have a great song. You should listen to it. Separate thing.
Named Galileo, by the way, in case you didn't get that context.
Right.
And in the web corner, the 2024 fall foliage map from the SmokyMountains.com is out for the U.S. It's a prediction map for what the fall foliage is going to look like this year. It's really interesting because they use a lot of different data sources, including asking the public, right now, if you are seeing any changes, to take pictures and submit them to them so that they can use it to update their predictions. It's pretty cool if you are looking to do any tourism related to fall foliage, or if you're planning a festival to get to know where the real true colors are going to be.
And if you're wanting to visit West Virginia, according to the prediction map, you want to be coming in October, which is not a big shock. That's pretty normal for West Virginia. But it is neat to know that the area that, oftentimes gets a bunch of touristy stuff on the sort of the eastern side of things, it's going to be out at peak season a lot quicker than some people may predict.
And peak looks like it's going to be about a week earlier than normal from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, normally West Virginia, you want to be going to your little mountain drives mid-October to, third week of October, somewhere in that ballpark, you're pretty okay. You can usually get a nice, drive in that space. It looks like, ratchet that up a week. By about the third week, a lot of it's going to be over.
Yeah.
Similar to what happened with the Cherry Blossom Festival. The timing is off now for a lot of things.
That's it for the news. Stick around for our interview with, again, Nat Case and Dan Coe, Nat is the series editor and Dan is one of the issue editors of Volume 7 of the Atlas of Design, which we've not talked about too much, I think, since the first or second issue. But yeah, they've been going on an every other year schedule, so check it out. So I'm happy to be joined today by Nat Case and Dan Coe, who are working with NASIS on a little bit of a project, something that's been going on for a few years, the Atlas of Design. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, for having us.
And before we get into the most recent edition that's about to come out in October, can you give us kind of an idea about the Atlas of Design? It's been a little while since we've talked about it and talked to anybody about it on the podcast. So just to remind people what it is.
Sure. So we're working on Volume 7. Atlas of Design is a biennial publication, comes out every 2 years. So the first edition, if you can do the math, is 2012. Volume 1 came out in 2012. And it came out of, kind of inspired by a book that came out for a couple editions, the Cartography Design Annual. It was a 2008 and a 2009 that Nick Springer Cartographic produced. And then I'm not sure about it was a handoff or it was inspired by or whatever the case was, but Tim Wallace and Daniel Huffman kind of spearheaded the first volume of the Atlas of Design as a NASIS project. It's always been a volunteer. The editorial staff is always an all-volunteer project, as is NASIS is pretty much an all-volunteer organization. And it's a different editorial team every 2 years. I took on, I'm Nat Case, and I took on the role of series managing editor last year to provide some continuity and some long-term planning and projecting. But I was on the editorial team for volumes 5 and 6, and Dan came on for volume 7. So that's the thumbnail history of where the volume came from.
Now I have issues 1 and 2, volumes 1 and 2, and then somehow have missed the other ones. Luckily, they're still available, some of them at least online. So I'll have to go back and get those. But it really is kind of this different take on cartography. It's not so much that it's a separation from traditional cartography. It's just about bringing together the different parts of cartography that, in our day-to-day web map, GIS, all these things that we're talking about a lot of times with students and new professionals into the field. Having this kind of touchstone to what cartography is, in addition to something to just convey data, is really nice.
When you talk about the just convey data, there was a phrase that was, I don't know how common it was, but it certainly irked Daniel Huffman especially, and it irked some of us too, that back when it started, which is the idea that design is just a matter of making data pretty. The idea that it's superficial and an add-on. You don't really need it. The important thing is the data. And I think one of the points of when it started, and it still is kind of a point, is that it's not an add-on. That the design of whatever map you're doing is part of what makes it a map, and not just random bit of data thrown at the screen. That's integral to what a map is. So exploring what that means. Dan, you can speak to this more for this current issue, but the way that we process the atlas, the way that it gets created, we open it up to entries for anyone, and we ask entrants, well, what does design mean to you? And both the judges and the contributors are given more or less a free field to define design however they want to define it. And that's part of the point, is to give a range of what design means to you, what design means to the judges. And so we come up with both some things that are just really classic mappy maps that are just really beautiful examples of what you think a map should be, and people thinking weird ideas of what a map could be. And it's that mix that makes the atlas special. Dan, is that square?
Yeah. The thing I love about this project is that, we have 33 maps in this new volume, and each one of them is telling a completely different story. And that, that idea of just design just being sort of the aesthetic of a map, I think is a little bit disingenuous, in that design is how the maps communicate the stories that they're telling, and each one does it in, a relatively unique way across the board. And there's a really wide variety of maps in this new volume that we're pretty excited about.
The ability to take, again, whether it's the technology perspective or the hand-drawn perspective, and be able to tell a story is the fundamental of mapping cartography. We have to have the data, but being able to understand what someone's trying to tell you with that data is the goal. And just throwing things on a map, which sometimes we have to do things quickly and get them out the door, doesn't really convey everything. So whenever you can take a minute and take it a little bit deeper and make the story the key is really important. So can you talk a little bit about how some of the choices in Volume 7 kind of, approach design?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a wide variety. There's several that pop to mind. There's a map by Ken Fields that shows snowfall in California.
I just have to say that's low-hanging fruit to choose Ken Fields from the beginning.
Yeah, it's I can't say it's one of my favorite of all these maps, but it's an excellent example of, using kind of a novel idea. He used these sort of snowflake photographs from the late 1800s that are public domain, kind of as a hexagon symbol in his maps to show the amount of snowfall across California in one recent winter. And, just the method of delivery with that design is just so perfect. And even beyond, using the snowflakes, the lightness and darkness of the snowflakes, showing different levels of snowfall is just, it's the way he does it is really, really nice. And I'm not doing it justice with my words here. You've got to see the map to kind of get the full understanding, but that's a really great example. There's a lot of other ones. There's a map of Vienna that is just so beautifully designed in the style of the Vienna secessionist movement and artistic movement in the late 1800s. And, you know, it's almost literary in the way that the map is designed. And one side is the physical, you know, the map of the city streets, and the other side tells about the secessionist movement and the different places that are shown on the map. So it's almost like a self-guided tour in this beautifully designed map. So those are two of the 33 that kind of bubble up to the top for me. But, you know, beyond that, I'm more of a physical cartographer, so I like terrain and things like that. There's a great map of Aotearoa and New Zealand that it just the texture and the bathymetry in the map is what really speaks to me. And you know, not only showing the parts of the country that are on land, but the surrounding bathymetry in the ocean is just really beautifully done. And the way the map is designed, yeah, it really speaks to me as sort of the types of maps that I like as well. There's perhaps one of my favorite maps that we included is called the Spirits of Scotland in the Atlas. And it takes a really novel approach to labeling. And it's a map of distilleries across Scotland. And the way that the labeling is done is in this really whimsical sort of swirly form that I've never seen done before. And it works really well for the subject matter and the overall design of the map. That's one that I really love.
Yeah, it's one of those that I hadn't really thought about the fact that it's a very Celtic swirl.
It's really well done. Yeah, that Spirits of Scotland map is by Milana Glebova. And the New Zealand map that I mentioned earlier is by Ian Rees.
Yeah.
One of the things that we were talking here about design being superficial or being integral to it, one of the pieces when you talk about turning out, you know, quick and dirty maps because you just got to use a template, that template is designed. You know, it may not be your design. It may be that it's a pre-existing set of symbols but someone has designed how it looks is still designed. And I think one of the things that's striking about looking through the maps is how much design. It's like there's design that then you see what it looks like, and then there's design after you've gotten all the data in place, and sort of finishing design to make it to clean up the last bit. It's design is a back and forth. I think that's one of the things that shows up as you look through. It's a process, which means that it's not just one stage in your map production. It when you start out, you have a design. It may not be one that fits, and you have to just move layers up and down, adjust colors, adjust styles, and so forth. So what shows up in the Atlas as obviously beautiful design, it's always a back and forth. There's always a sense of, you start out with a sense of how it's supposed to look, and then you have to adjust it at all stages of production. So the calling design a finishing product really does a disservice. And then one of the things that this shows is the depth to which people start out designing the look and feel and the data structure, and then keep working on it and keep iteratively coming back to it. And you can see that with even things that are very, very clean design. There's a map. It's a wayfinding map, very basic map of Calgary for the Skyway system. And it's so simple. It's such a simple, clean thing. And you can see someone went in and said, I'm going to make all the curves this diameter. I'm going to keep the points this. I'm going to set up the rule set. And they probably adjusted the rule set a little bit, somewhat as they went along. But it's so rule-based in its structure. And that's the design, is this rule-based, that's the design that really shows up, as opposed to some of the hand-drawn things where every mark, I mean, you look at Anton Thomas's map of the world wildlife. He spent 2 years full-time drawing, 3 years drawing every single line with a colored pencil, redrawing, erasing. You know, every mark is this, you know, as part of this immense mark-based design process. And then you look at Calgary and you think, how long did it actually probably took a long time to figure out. I mean, instead of making it a 0.34 diameter curve, I'm going to make it a 0.36 and see how that looks. I'm going to make make the dot instead of 1.3 points. How about if we make it 1.5 points with it? All those fiddly bits of adjusting the rules. So I think sometimes people think of like the fine arts vision of design, that it's like Anton Thomas's, where every mark is part of the design. But in today's algorithmic and software-driven world, it's also all the choices of how rules are going to be fine-tuned and how they're going to be adjusted. And there's a big range of what design means in a process standpoint.
That the thing about that Calgary map that I often think about is it's those decisions to simplify and to bring clarity to the map. That's the design that helps you communicate really clearly to people that are using it. And it's a very functional map. And I think part of the essay mentions, like, it needs to be simplified because, if you put every little nook and turn in that map, it would make it a lot more complicated and hard to read. So it's beautiful in its simplicity.
Kind of building on that idea of rules and simplicity, I think there's different maps that do this, but especially the North American maps, rivers maps, and again, the snowflake map or snowfall map, both do that really well, where it's a very simple idea. And there's definitely a very clear set of rules that have been set up. But again, it's just tweaking those rules. So, taking the idea of the subway map and using that to define and place a selection of rivers, or, like you were saying before, using this more current grid hexagon. Is my brain just broken? Yes, hexagon system of that we've been seeing a lot more in the last 5-10 years, and using snowflakes as opposed to just hexagons to be able to convey that information. So yeah, just using the existing rules but turning them just a little bit for different ideas is really well represented in just these few maps.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because using kind of different rules to apply to different maps, there's a couple maps that really represent sort of older style cartography, but with newer data that wouldn't have applied 100 years ago, for example. So there's a map of Boston sea level rise that is in the style of the old Sanborn fire insurance maps, but it's obviously showing this new climate change sort of themed data. There's a map of the melting of the polar ice caps, sort of in this older atlas style, that's really great. So there's these sort of interesting design juxtapositions in several of the maps that I think work really well to sort of make you think about the data, in new ways.
And even some of the hand rendered maps, I think I know this for sure, but I think most people who do hand drawn maps will often start with GIS data, with rectified, geographic, even if it's not, they might start with a base map that was digitally rendered. But these days, almost all the data that you're going to start with has a digital source that you're working with, even as you're rendering it with pencil or pen or whatever. The map of the moon by Kevin Sheehan, it's a black and white pen and ink. Amazingly, it's a beautiful detail. It's just amazingly detailed pen and ink work. He had a map of Paris in the volume 6 edition, I think, but it's all rendered from modern photography and modern imaging, but using older techniques, quill pen and ink sort of work. One of the things that interests me is how the technology, the delivery technology affects design. Ken Fields is a good example of that. The print doesn't show this, but he printed the map originally with the metallic ink for the snowflakes, which really, when you see one of the actual printed maps, it adds that extra silvery, wintry touch to it. And he's done a lot of work. He did a piece that was in the last edition where he took electoral information on a grid for the U.S. and used Phillips screws to show elevation and to show the net, and painted the top with the relative Democrat versus Republican. So he used I mean, made a funny joke. Screwed was the name of the piece, but using the physical object as part of the design and part of the output. How do you represent things with stuff? That's one of the things that throughout the history of the Atlas, there have been some really lovely examples. There's a quilt map in this by Eleanor Lutz, who is a longtime contributor. She's done some really amazing work with planetary maps and solar system maps in the last few years. And this one, she quilted a map of central New York, around the area around Central Park, and using, I mean, it's accurate. It shows the stitch lines show the trails in Central Park, and the blocks are made from cloth that she acquired from friends and found on the street and whatever. That interaction between physical stuff. I make print maps. I make maps for print as a living mostly, but I'm mostly working here on the screen. And so seeing people really work with what it's going to look like when the physical object is delivered, whether that's a wayfinding thing in the Calgary skyways that it's going to be backlit this way and it's going to have this ambient light from sunlight that you have to take into account, or the physical printing activity is always a real treat in looking at Atlas of Design, people taking that into account.
There's also kind of the other end of things where the bowhead hunt from Amanda Amon that kind of gets away from the traditional Western perspective of describing what a map is, and just gives a different worldview on what place can mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a couple of really excellent. There's another excellent example in addition to that map of the California Bay Area, the Before You Are Here map that is similar in its sort of non-traditional non-linearity, being more conceptual in its geographies. That's a fascinating map to sort of dive into, just like that the map you just mentioned is. And, swinging the pendulum the other direction, there's, the traditional reference maps. Like there's a great recreational map of Pennsylvania. There's, a beautiful map of the United States by Dave Imus that just is so dense in its details and labeling and just really well executed reference map. So the Atlas is a really great way to sort of represent all these different styles and ideas of what design is, and what it can show and what it can do.
I think as we're kind of heading towards the end of the conversation, I wanted to hit on the forward that Nat wrote. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective as you were writing that? As you were saying in it, you hadn't actually seen what the final maps were going to be when you wrote it, but already knew after 6 volumes, kind of the direction it was heading.
Well, one of the things that's interested me as an editor is the extent to which the Atlas of Design shows what everyone thinks of as the cream. The judges say, well, what's the best map? What's the coolest map? And I mean, every day I make maps that are never going to make it into the Atlas, maps for books, maps for local maps, whatever. And those are designed too. And I hope they're designed well for the purposes to which they're intended. Map design isn't just about showing off and being a, kind of a prima donna on stage with the spotlight. Although those maps are cool. I mean, I love looking at those. I think of it as like a candy store. These books are just like, you open it up and there's another chocolate that's just so delicious to look at. So that was a lot of what I was thinking about, is thinking about how, this is the best of cartography, but that isn't all the cartography. Cartography is also just a big working tradition. You think about how, someone wins the Nobel Prize for Literature or the Pulitzer Prize, and then there's thousands and thousands and thousands of millions of bits of writing that are essential to keeping our civilization running, and those are really important too. And the what this represents, what the Atlas represents, is just like the shiny surface, the shiny bits on the surface of this really huge and rich tradition, as is how I think of it, as a graphic tradition, that we're all looking at each other's maps, not just these, but you pick a map up off the shelf and say, I could have done, well, actually that was really well done. That was really well done, but I could have done that. I would have done that differently. And that's a lot of what the design process, not just map by map, but as an ongoing process is for me, is looking at other maps and figuring out how to do my maps better, in large part by looking at other people's work. So that's that's in a nutshell what it's about. It's about mapping as a tradition and looking at it in that viewpoint of not just how can I make my work in my little cell better, but being part of this big community. And I should say that that's actually one of the things that I love about NASIS as an organization is that it really focuses on community, and it focuses on, we bring in a lot of students and grad students. A lot of first timers come for the first time to NASIS. And NASIS is nicest is one of our mottos, and that we're very much about listening to each other and sharing with each other and being part of a community rather than just, checking off the box of I gave a paper at a conference for your resume, being together as a group. And I think the Atlas is a reflection of that, of it being a community of cartographers.
One nice thing I want to add on to that is, most NASIS members are from the United States and Canada. And one nice thing about the Atlas project, it's sort of progressively expanded its reach more globally. I mean, this year's Atlas has representative maps from, dozens of different countries and regions around the world. So it's been really great to sort of expand that view of design to a more worldwide level with this project.
And even within, the globally, but also, under the broad umbrella of diversity, equity stuff, which has been a focus of NASIS' institutional work over the last few years. The two examples we gave of indigenously framed maps, there's been this huge growth, and it's still very much ongoing, 10 years ago, people were looking at indigenous mapping in the U.S., historically in the Pacific, and in Australia in particular, and sort of saying, well, that's a really different way of thinking about it. And what we're seeing now is people taking that difference and saying, okay, how can we make it into a thing that other people will look at and understand and see? And it's really exciting to see that transition from just sort of an exotic, it had an exotic approach, I think, for a lot of Western cartographers. And now we're starting to see it not just being exotic, but being interesting and integral. And how can we understand it? How can we not just see our work as the only way to show space, and have that actively be part of community work? So go team.
7's about to come out. What are your thoughts on the next 2 years as you begin to look towards 8? What does that look like in terms of your timeline and all those things? When can people begin to submit their maps for interest?
So the timeline right now, I should say that the Atlas 7, Volume 7 is in pre-order. You can pre-order it now. The actual books will be out beginning of October, and you could pick it up at the NASIS conference. If you're coming to the NASIS conference, you can have it mailed to you. atlasofdesign.org is where you should go to, both to find more about the Atlas, and also there's an order page that links you to, we sell through Amazon, through the website, and through Eastview, which sells to libraries, institutions. So that our focus is on promoting the book and talking about it, including things like podcasts, for example. So thank you for having us on here to let us spread the word. The new team of editors will come on early next year, figure out who's next. Usually the call for entries is at the NASIS conference in October of 2025. It'll be this year. The deadline is usually January of 2020. It'll be January 2026. And then judging and processing and all that stuff happens for several months. Dan can testify to just how much work it is. It's a process.
I'm surprised. That's a tight timeline.
We got it down. I'm not sure we got it down to a science, but we got it down to something. And then it goes to print it went to print right around August 20th, and then we have printed books in October. So that's our current cycle.
Well, you jumped ahead and answered my last question about the actual Volume 7. So, but like you said, it's atlasofdesign.org. If you go to /7, that also gives you a direct link to some examples of what's going on in the book as well. I don't know, is there anything else you want to mention about Volume 7?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the other editors. We're just two of a large group of people that have worked on this project. So Aileen Clark, Aaron Greb, and Aaron Kolker are the other 3 editors on this project, and they've all put in a ton of time and effort to this project. So thank you to them. And then we also have 12 volunteer judges that, take those several hundred entries and basically rank them. And that sort of informs our decision as to how how we choose what goes into the atlas. So I'm not going to mention everybody, but there's a lot of people that have been involved in this project over the course of these 2 years.
And as has been true the last couple of editions, you could have made 2 atlases. We could have made 2 atlases out of there was another 33 that we said, boy, if only we had a bigger book. So if you look at the list of honorable mentions in the atlas, you get to see even more of a range of really cool people doing really cool work out there.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of blog posts in the past week or so about those entries that we wrote a little bit about. So if you want to read about that, again, atlasofdesign.org is the place to find all of that.
And then a little bit of a plug for NACES 2024, October 16th to the 19th in Tacoma, Washington. Probably a little bit late for folks to make a plan to get there now, but if you're in the area, jump in the car and drive over.
And NACES members get a 25% discount on the atlas, one of the benefits of membership. So if you're thinking about it, join in. We'd love to have you.
And it's a great organization, not just for the atlas and for the conference, but the journal and like you said, just the community itself. Thank you for joining us today. Is there anything personally outside of the Atlas of Design that you kind of want to highlight, or just focus on the atlas today?
Just focus on the atlas. And thank you so much for taking the time and letting us rattle on about it, because we love it. We love it, and we want to spread the joy. So
yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's a great project, and we look forward to I don't look forward to it because I actually got a sneak peek copy, but everybody else is looking forward to Volume 7. So thanks a lot.
Great.
Thanks.
On to the events corner. As Sue said, we want you to go to events if you can. There are still virtual events as well out there. I know that coming up with due dates, the AAG has already passed, I think it's early bird registration, but abstracts are still being accepted. The Esri User Conference should be accepting abstracts pretty soon. I don't know who else.
Those are the big ones, but there are also lots of other, the GISP Pro, what is it? EURISA's GIS Pro conference just took place a couple weeks ago. And so, keep it on your radar. It's one that people miss a lot.
Or it's coming up in October.
I think it was in September, wasn't it?
Sometimes that one's earlier. Yeah. Applied Geography is usually in October.
Applied Geography, the Remote Sensing Conference, which I'm not sure if it's still called ASPRS, or actually no, ASPRS is part of GeoWeek now. So there's something still in the fall. That's there. NACES, of course, we were just talking to the guys about the NACES conference is coming up in October, where you can, of course, pick up the 7th edition if you do buy it.
Pick up a copy.
Yeah, pick it up instead of having it shipped to you. Let's see. It's going to be, or was, October 7th through 10th.
So coming up.
Yep. So just around the corner. So
Portland, Maine. That's kind of cool. So there you go. If you want to do full foliage and talk GIS, there could not be a better setting than Portland, Maine.
That might be a little late.
Peak,
for
a little
Portland. They're up there. Yeah. So lots of conferences every year in October. And again, regional conferences, a lot of them East Lakes, West Lakes. CDAG, of course, always the week of Thanksgiving. But most of the others, I think, are October or very early November. So check those out. Of course, if you want us to add your event to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at barb@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com.
And I'm available at jesse@veryspatial.com. Of course, if you want to find any of our contact information, you can go over to veryspatial.com/contacts and do that.
As always,
We're the folks in Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.